This is The Poison Tree. It's my first novel, and it's a mystery in a way. I wonder what it says about me that all of my favourite books, the ones I always wanted to read and the ones that I always knew I would write when I grew up, or hoped to write when I grew up, have a body count. I read my first Agatha Christie, I think, as a pre-teen, and since then I've been hooked on the genre, which has, I think, more scope than any other. Crime can encompass anything from this book, which is a relatively gentle psychological thriller, to something like The Wire, to the hardcore forensic pathology novels. This one is probably not a crime book in that conventional sense. It doesn't feature a cop or a detective or a PI or a pathologist. What I'm drawn to writing about is ordinary people who find themselves caught up in death and extreme situations and making terrible choices. I want to write about people who find that this is a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence for them, rather than that sort of jaded stock character for whom death is something they encounter every day at work. So The Poison Tree has been called a psychological thriller, a domestic drama, a why-done-it, a how-done-it, and my favourite, a murder mystery in reverse. And it's my favourite description because it picks up another aspect of the book that sets it apart from the more procedural crime writing. Rather than start with the body and work my way back from that, we start this book knowing who the killer is, but not who he killed, and so it's the identity of the victims is the question that drives the plot. I have a few tags of my own here. When I was writing it, I knew that I wanted, as well as a page-turner and a mystery, I wanted it to be a coming-of-age story with touches of the Gothic and even a bit of a love story. I think I succeeded. I'm going to read a couple of passages for you now so that you can get a feel for the book. In the first, our narrator Karen is a young mother living in the English countryside. Her partner Rex has just come home after 10 years in prison for a double murder, and for the sake of their daughter Alice, they're trying to rebuild a family life, but obviously things are very fragile. They're getting to know each other after a decade apart. Neither of them are the same people they were, and most of the book is told in extended flashback. It's said in the summer that they met in 1997, but in this opening scene, Karen, who has a secret of her own, has a midnight phone call that brings her past roaring back into her present. I let the telephone fall from my hand. Panic first cripples, then revives me. My fingertips tingle as they feel their way around the coffee table, scrabbling first for my car keys and then for my cell phone. I seem to have 8 limbs as I try to get dressed in the dark, pulling on my coat and a pair of oversized sheepskin boots. At the threshold, I hesitate for a second, then rush back to my desk and fumble in the drawer for my passport and a credit card that I keep for emergencies. I pull the door behind me in silence, although blood roars and rushes in my ears. With shaking hands, I double lock it. Whether to keep someone in or to keep someone out, I can't yet know. In the dark interior of the car, I turn the key in the ignition and wince as the air blows icy cold, dispersing the fluffy clouds of my breath. My hands are so cold they feel wet. I'm relieved to find a pair of wooden gloves bundled in my left pocket. Before putting them on, I use my cell phone to cover the last caller's tracks. I call the house phone, wait for the click of connection, and hang up before it has a chance to ring. The windshield is opaque with frost, and I don't have time to wait for the heaters to defog the glass. I wipe a porthole in the passenger window and squint back into the dark recess of the bedroom window. If Rex had heard me, the light would be on by now. He would be silhouetted at the window, mouthing my name. Would that stop me? Would anything? The car is pointed directly at the front of the house. If I turn the headlights on, they will shine into the window, so with no beams to guide me and only a smeared handprint of visibility through the windows, I pull out into the road. Only when I have guessed my way to the end of our lane do we switch on the full beam. The countryside is frosted and stark. Naked hedgerows cast eerie shapes in front of me, and the high banks of the narrow road throw up shadows that take human form. The dead, the missing, and the mist surround me now, passive spirits who have become active ghosts. I'm afraid to glance behind. They pursue me as I drive aggressively, suicidally, mounting the grass verge when I take a blind bend much too fast. I make an emergency stop to avoid hitting the truck that suddenly looms in front of me. It's a filthy vehicle of indeterminate colour, tools loose in the back, moving so slowly that the driver must be drunk. I have no option but to slow to a crawl behind him. I ought to use this enforced pause for rational thought, but there is nothing rational about this situation. I'm driving alone in pyjamas and wet, clammy boots on a country lane in the middle of the night. Nobody knows where I am or why. I had only been thinking of the others, but for the first time it strikes me that my own safety might be compromised if I continue. A glance at my speedometer tells me that we are travelling at 12 miles an hour. I toot and flash, but by the cold blue glow in his cab, I see that he's making a phone call. I map the road ahead in my mind. I have driven it so often that I know every pothole, kink and curve. I take a deep breath, crunch the gears and plunge blindly into the passing place just to my right. The driver of a black car coming in the opposite direction has had the same idea, and we skim each other as we pass, with a sickening screech of paint on metal. My left-hand mirror is wrenched from its casing and falls to dangle lifelessly at the side from a lone wire, like a severed limb attached to its body by a single vein. The retreating driver sounds his horn angrily, the Doppler effect making it drop a forlorn semitone as it continues in the direction of my house. The truck is between us, and it's too late to turn and see if the driver was alone or carrying a passenger, if it was a regular car or a taxi. I pick up my crazy pace. Only a speed camera, predicted by a luminous sign, persuades my foot to the brake. On the borders of the town, the scrubby roadside edges give way to narrow pavements, and trees thin out to accommodate houses, a pub, a gas station. Lampposts appear, imitation Victorian globes like a parade of tiny moons, and I realise with a corresponding lucidity that this is it. The event I have been expecting and dreading for a third of my life is finally here. It suddenly feels very hot inside the car. My hands are sweating inside my gloves, my eyes are dry, and my tongue is stuck to the roof of my mouth. I have given up so much and done so many terrible things already for the sake of my family that I can only keep going. I don't know what's going to happen to us. I am frightened, but I feel strong. I have the strength of a woman who has everything to lose. That's the prologue to the book. I'm going to take you back to 1997 when things were a little bit happier. In this passage, Karen is a very gifted but very sheltered and naive student. She's just graduated from a prestigious London university, and in the same day she's been dumped by her boyfriend, who was horrible, and in doing so has pretty much lost her entire social circle. So she's got that feeling that I think lots of us can relate to, of just sitting there wishing something would happen and someone would walk in. And this is her introduction to Biba, who is Rex's sister, and it turns out to be a case of be careful what you wish for, but not quite yet. I sometimes wonder if that day I was like one of those chicks that hatches and thinks the first creature it sees is its mother. Would I have taken up with anyone who offered the hand of friendship? Perhaps, but I doubt I would have fallen so hard. I met her in the afternoon, and by the evening everything had changed. She was in the same building as me all morning, only a few rooms and floors away, but the only difference in the atmosphere in Queen Charlotte's College was the constricting silence that coiled around us more and more tightly as our finals drew nearer. I was thinking about this and deciding that I would do my PhD somewhere beautiful and ancient. The next place I studied would have wooden doors and crooked staircases, and my rooms would have leaded, ill-fitting windows. I shouldered my way through set after set of heavy green fire doors, heading for the elevator. The landing was empty, except for a girl writing a notice on the department board. I mean, she was literally writing it on the pinprick cork with a fat red poster paint marker. She had her back to me, and I watched her form the letters in silence. Wanted, native German speaker for translation and accent tutoring. She paused to consider the next line. This gave me more time to consider her. It was the summer when the Spice Girls were inescapable. Most of the university's female students had declared a fashion allegiance to one or other of the singers, decking themselves out like clowns or children or girls who worked on a perfume counter. The woman before me appeared to be dressed like all five of them at once. She wore purple crushed velvet flares, sneakers with a platform sole that elevated her to just beyond my height, and a shiny, tiny England football t-shirt that looked older than she was with a hole in the armpit. She also carried a brand new Gucci handbag of padded leather with gold chains for straps. "I can pay you," she wrote. "Contact me. Thank you. Biba." Biba. I rolled her name around inside my head and willed her to turn around. She slipped her red pen into her bag and would have walked out of my life forever if shock at her audacity hadn't made me gasp, half laugh. She turned to face me with a sardonic, over-casual, "What?" The deep gurgle of her laughter made an instant conspirator of me. She smiled, glassy brown eyes sparkling from beneath heavy round lids fringed with thick, stiff lashes. I'd seen eyes like those before, on a doll when I was a little girl. "Are you going to tell me off for defacing university property?" she asked in a tone that made it clear she trusted me not to. "No," I said. "I was going to point out that if you don't leave a number, no one will know how to contact you." "Oh, fuck," she said. "I'm always forgetting things like that." She spoke like a BBC announcer from the 50s. If voices really can be clear as bells, hers was, the small silver kind you use to summon servants. "Maybe I can help out," I offered. "My German's fluent." "You don't look German," she said, which surprised me. Many people in Europe had taken me for a native before I began to speak, and sometimes afterwards too. I'm going to skip a few pages here. We find out that Biba is an actress and needs some work translating a song that she's got to sing. They go to the student bar, they have a glass of Merlot, it's nice. Just as the girls are about to part, Biba says to Karen, "What are you doing on Saturday? Because Rex and I are having a party. Well, I'm having a party, so Rex hasn't got much say in it." "Rex?" "My brother." "Oh, you live with your family?" "Oh, it's just me and Rex, we're orphans." A new set of questions formed a disorderly line on my tongue. "My 21st, she continued, so it's going to be huge. Queenswood Lane, N6. Can you remember that? Haven't got anything to write it down." "Don't pretend you've got anything better to do this weekend." Queenswood Lane, N6. I committed it to memory. Panic was unfamiliar to me then, but I felt it as a series of obstacles presented themselves. What would I wear? How would I get home? "Bring fabulous people," she instructed. The panic must have shown on my face. My roommates, oh Christ. I could already see the antipathy between them crackling like static on nylon sheets. Her next words were spoken with unexpected gentleness. "Don't worry. You don't have to bring anyone at all, just promise me you'll be there." In the glow of her understanding, I felt as though I were being read and interpreted for the first time, unfolded and examined like a map left in a drawer for so long that its creases and pleats come permanently to describe their own topography. It was at once unsettling and reassuring. "I promise," I said. I have spent a lot of time since then wondering where the cut-off point was in the chain of events that led me to where we all are, or aren't, today. My life, had it continued along its predicted trajectory, would have been unrecognisable. No Alice, no Rex. But if I'm honest with myself, my fate, and hers, and the fate of the others, was sealed the second I first saw her. To flesh things out a little bit more, we know at the beginning that Rex, Karen's partner in the present day and father of her child, is guilty of 2 murders. And when the book opens, Biba isn't around anymore. And neither are many of the other secondary characters who you meet as the novel progresses. And as I explained, the fun is in finding out who really isn't around anymore and why. Would anyone like to know anything more?
Are you just beginning your tours, or have you been through other cities?
I am fresh off the plane from New York. I did a reading on the Upper East Side last night, and the day before that I was in London, which is why I still think it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, so, and I'm travelling further up the West Coast and then finishing off in Milwaukee at the beginning of next week.
Biba is such an interesting character. How'd you come up with her? Or is she based on anybody?
Yes, I'm asked this a lot, funnily enough. As the book progresses, Biba, who has the capacity to be immensely charming, also reveals a quite dark and destructive side, which is fully explained when you find out her family history. But a lot of my friends have said I know exactly who she's based on. It's her, isn't it? A lot of people think it's my old flatmate. A lot of people think it's my husband's ex-girlfriend, which is very strange because I've never met her. But she's a composite of lots of people I've known over the years. In some instances, people whose behaviour has been so outrageous that I've had to turn it down because I think that it would stretch credibility in a novel. And I think most of us have at some stage been half seduced by somebody with this capacity to charm and beguile one minute and then be completely abusive the next. I mean, it's classic narcissistic behaviour, really. Yeah, a handful of people that I've known, and fortunately nobody that I have known or been close to enough to be scarred by.
So when you're writing, and it's set in England,
Yes.
do you write terminology that's for an English audience or for an American audience? Just because I was curious when you were reading from the prologue.
Yes, cell phones and sneakers.
Or truck instead of lorry, and miles per hour instead of kilometers.
Yeah, well, we think in miles as well, actually. There's a kind of double think because we're on the edge of Europe, so we can compute both at once. No, the American edition does have a few lost in translation changes, which I was a bit shaken by at first, but they didn't ever change the way my characters spoke, and that was the most important thing to me. And I think you hear of writers having such battles with editors about things that want to be changed in their books. I thought I will save my objections for when I really need to win a fight. So it doesn't bother me so long as they leave the spoken. I mean, if you put the words "I'm off to the liquor store" or something into inverted commas, then that would sound odd. But I hope it doesn't jar too much.
How did you come up with the idea to do it in reverse?
I don't know. I always knew that I didn't want to write the straightforward procedural, and when you're writing about normal people rather than police, you need to do something. You can't start with the body and work back because who's going to find out about it? You need the structure of the narrative is what tells your story for you. So yeah, I thought that was one way to just do something a little bit different. And lots of the books that I love have done similar things. You know, they start out with I can't think of another one where you're given the murderer on page one and not the victim, but there's a book by Barbara Vine, A Fatal Inversion, where you don't find out the murderer and the victim are both revealed at the end. And the build-up is done very skillfully there, so that was quite an inspirational novel when I was working on this one. Just the idea that you can withhold whatever information you want from the reader. It's great fun playing God. Yes, it's really good for a control freak like me.
So did you know who the murdered victim was when you started?
Yeah, I did know that. I knew how it would open, and I knew how it would end, but I didn't have a clue how I was going to get there. So it was the most fun I've ever had writing this book, I have to say. But I did do the equivalent of just dumping myself in a strange city and saying, right, now find your way home. You know, your hotel's over there. What are you going to do about it? It's very, very challenging to work out a puzzle that you have made, and very astonishing to find that actually you don't know the answer, even though you thought it up.
Did you find some surprises along the way then?
Yeah, I did, and I mean the ending. If I'm going to find out the ending that you have in this version, ends on. I'm going to tell you the page so that you can mark it in your own books. It used to end on page 309. Don't look too closely because it's got a spoiler in it. So if you could find page 309 with your eyes closed, that would be helpful. And then the last two chapters were added in my second draft, and that ending astonished me, and it was at the behest of my agent and some publishers who actually rejected the book first time round because I thought I was being terribly clever giving people a cliffhanger ending. And apparently, while some readers like that, many more do not. And I think, which was a very valid point. You know, I think especially within the genre of mystery, when it's lovely to do that Agatha Christie thing of just tying it all up in a bow at the end. So I went away and wrote a conclusive ending, which now feels completely inevitable and a natural part of the book. But I certainly didn't know that that extra twist would be part of the novel when I thought I'd finished it the first time.
Now you are a freelance journalist.
Yes.
So how was your writing process a little different with in terms of writing the book? Did you have it's kind of interesting just coming into this.
It's the completely opposite process actually, because to do good work as a journalist you need to be plugged into the world. You need to be constantly on Twitter and on the email and reading every paper and just trying to find out what the trends are and keep up and reaching out to editors and pitching ideas. And to be a successful novelist, or to complete a novel anyway, I think you have to just put your earplugs on, turn the phone off, sit down and write and write and write and get on with it. So in that sense actually being a journalist was more of a hindrance than a help. It was useful in that I could sit down. I'm used to having my work out in public, so maybe I was a bit less nervous about that first blank page than I would have been if I hadn't had anything in print. And it's been very useful in the editing process because I'm used to people criticising my work essentially and telling me to go away and do it better, which apparently happens to people all the time. So and it was I did a lot of short fiction writing courses when I was thinking about making the transition. The other reason that I wanted to become a novelist rather than a journalist was just because I was exhausted for the reasons I've just gone into of constantly having to keep up with everything. And it was great fun when I was in my 20s, but then I became a parent and I didn't have the energy to be running around following people down the street with a microphone or a dictaphone asking them what was in their handbag or whatever Pulitzer Prize winning story I was working on that week. So I very much had the feeling that I was ready to do a long form project, something that I could sit down and really work on and grow, as opposed to a different piece of work every week. Also, the girls in their 20s do it for half the price I do. So, which is exactly what I did when I was in my 20s. I used to undercut the more experienced journalists. So that's karma.
Any more questions?
For a psychological thriller, do you have to research? How do you know how people think?
Make it up. It's literally, there was I don't know if it's laziness, but I didn't do a single bit of research when it came to this. It's all guesswork.
Would you say, was it difficult to get published, or for you?
The book was rejected. It's a tale of two countries actually. In Britain, the first draft of the book was rejected, partly because it was we pitched it in November 2008 when the bottom was falling out of the world, and it was the week that Lehman Brothers folded, and nobody in any industry was taking a risk on anything. And they said they had a lot of uncertainty, not just about the ending, but they said, well, we don't know how to market this book. It's crime fiction because it's a mystery and there's a murder in it, but it's also quite like women's fiction, but we can't really market it as women's fiction because it isn't just a love story, so we don't know what to do about that. And it's well written, but we can't market it as literary fiction because it's got a plot. And they actually said these things to me. It was essentially rejected because they couldn't work out which shelf in the store to put it on. And then I went away, polished it a bit, rewrote the ending, took it out again maybe 7 months later, when things had calmed down a bit. And this time, even the same people had the absolute opposite response. They said, this is great, it's crossover fiction. It's crime for women, it's literary fiction for people who don't read literary fiction. It was then accepted for the exact reason that it was rejected the first time, which was my first introduction to the fickle world of publishing. But so that was how it went in Britain. And in the US, my agent in New York sent it out in the morning, and I think 2 days later I had a deal, so with no questions asked. Although whether she'd have said that if she'd seen the first draft with its clever ending, I don't know. But it was a much more positive and straightforward experience here. Although I do think that having been rejected and at a time when I got quite far down the line with a lot of editors in various publishing houses, and you know, was doing interviews on the phone with them. One while I was actually in labour, I remember. I think the lady from Random House said, "So, which contemporary writers do you like to read?" And I started speaking, and then I had to put the phone down and have a contraction, and then come back and finish the interview. So yeah, it did look like I was going to be picked up, and then I wasn't, and it was very disheartening. But it does mean that now there's no part of the process that I take for granted at all. I'm completely grateful for every word anybody reads. So, which I'm sure I would have been had it been plain sailing from day one. But it does make me doubly appreciative of the fact that it exists at all in print in America. It's amazing.